The conference room was alive with noise, clients shuffling papers, coffee cups clinking against saucers, someone laughing at a joke I didn't hear. My phone vibrated on the polished mahogany table, Tyler's name lighting up the screen with that familiar photo of us from our honeymoon in Santorini. Back when we were happy, back when I believed in us. I excused myself from the client presentation and stepped into the quiet hallway, the thick carpet muffling my footsteps. The building's air conditioning hummed softly overhead as I pressed the phone to my ear, expecting the usual mundane check-in about dinner plans or whether I'd remembered to schedule the pest control appointment he'd been nagging me about for weeks. Instead, his voice came through the speaker cold and cutting, laced with something I'd never heard before. Triumph mixed with cruelty. "I'm divorcing you." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my free hand instinctively reaching for the wall to steady myself, waiting for the punchline that never came. "I've already sold the apartment," he continued, his tone almost gleeful, like a child revealing a secret they'd been holding on to for too long. "So you'll need to figure out where you're going to live when you get back. I'd suggest starting your search soon. The new owners take possession in 3 weeks." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white, not from shock, from the sheer, staggering audacity of it. The apartment we'd toured together on a rainy Saturday morning 3 years ago. The place I'd fallen in love with because of the bay windows that overlooked the park, and the way the afternoon sunlight poured into the kitchen, painting everything golden. The home I'd poured my savings into, the down payment, the furniture, the renovations. While Tyler frittered his bonuses away on expensive watches, weekend golf trips, and dinners at steakhouses with the guys. "You sold the apartment?" I kept my voice level, each word carefully measured, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing me break. "Yeah." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that made my stomach turn. "Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than that tiny place anyway. We're looking at a 3-bedroom condo downtown. Much more our style, Nicole." The name landed like a physical blow, even though I'd suspected for months that there was someone else. The late-night phone calls he took in the other room, always stepping onto the balcony where he thought I couldn't hear him. The sudden interest in expensive cologne that I'd never bought him. The new subscription to a gym across town when we had a perfectly good one in our building. The way he'd stopped asking about my day, stopped touching me unless it was perfunctory and expected, stopped looking at me like I was someone worth seeing. But hearing him say her name so casually, pronouncing each syllable with a familiarity that spoke of inside jokes and shared secrets, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience to be discarded like an old piece of furniture he'd grown tired of, ignited something cold and sharp inside my chest. "Sounds good," I said, my voice steady as steel, betraying none of the calculations already spinning through my mind. There was a pause on the other end, stretching out for 3 long heartbeats. I could almost hear his confusion, the slight deflation of someone who'd expected tears or begging or at least an argument. When I said nothing more, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Right, well, I'll have my things out by the time you're back. Or most of them anyway. Some stuff might take an extra trip." I ended the call without another word, watching the screen fade to black before slipping the phone back into my pocket. My name is Amelia Foster, and up until that phone call, I thought I'd married a man I could trust. Tyler and I had been together for 6 years, 3 years dating, 3 years married. We'd built a life together, or at least I thought we had. The apartment had been the crown jewel of our partnership, a 2-bedroom in a historic neighborhood with exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors that creaked in the morning, and a small balcony where I'd grown tomatoes and basil every summer. It wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything I thought we'd achieved together. Every piece of furniture had a story. The vintage dining table I'd found at an estate sale and refinished myself. The bookshelf I'd built from scratch after watching 3 YouTube tutorials. The framed photos on the walls documenting our journey from awkward first dates to confident partnership. But looking back now, standing in that sterile corporate hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the cracks had always been there. Tyler's dismissive comments whenever I brought up our finances, waving away my concerns about his spending habits, the way he'd brush off my questions with a charming smile and a quick subject change, redirecting the conversation before I could press further, his habit of signing documents without reading them, always trusting that I'd handle the boring details while he focused on the big picture. I'd chalked it up to confidence. to trust in our partnership, to the division of labor that made relationships work. I was detail-oriented. He was spontaneous. I managed the logistics. He brought the excitement. It seemed balanced. Now I realized it was arrogance. Pure, reckless arrogance born from years of getting away with carelessness because someone else always cleaned up his messes. I stood in that hallway for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the glass window that overlooked the city skyline. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. My expression was calm, professional, composed. Inside, though, a plan was already forming, cold, methodical, and absolutely foolproof. Because there was one crucial detail Tyler didn't know. One piece of information he'd completely overlooked in his rush to discard me like yesterday's news. The apartment deed had been in my name alone for 8 months. When we refinanced earlier in the year to take advantage of historically low interest rates, the bank had required a single owner to streamline the paperwork and qualify for a special program. Tyler had agreed without hesitation, barely glancing up from his phone during the appointment to bother reading what he was signing. The loan officer, a patient woman named Patricia with reading glasses perched on her nose, had explained everything in careful detail. The ownership transfer, the tax implications, the legal ramifications. Tyler had waved her off with an impatient, yeah, whatever works, before returning to scrolling through sports scores on his phone. I'd kept a copy of every document, every signature with its flowing, careless loops, every page that proved Tyler had willingly, knowingly, and legally transferred his ownership to me. I'd filed them carefully in our home office, organized in a labeled folder he'd never once looked at. His carelessness was about to be his downfall. The rest of the day crawled by in agonizing slowness. I sat through client presentations, nodding at the right moments, taking meticulous notes I'd never look at again. My colleagues probably thought I was unusually focused, leaning forward with intense concentration during discussions of quarterly projections and market analyses. My mind was elsewhere, already 3 steps ahead of Tyler's smug confidence. He thought he'd cornered me, left me powerless and scrambling. He thought this was checkmate, that I'd come home to find my life dismantled, my security shattered, my future uncertain. He probably imagined me crying on the phone to my mother, desperately searching rental listings, maybe even begging him to reconsider. He had no idea he was about to lose everything. When I finally returned to my hotel room that evening, the city lights twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows, I kicked off my heels and felt them land with satisfying thuds on the carpeted floor. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar, an expensive Cabernet I'd normally never indulge in, and pulled out my phone. The first call I made was to Chloe Martinez, my lawyer and one of my oldest friends from law school. We'd stayed close over the years, meeting for drinks every few months to complain about work and share war stories from the legal trenches. "Chloe, it's Amelia. I need your help with something urgent." "What's wrong?" Her voice sharpened immediately. All business, the way it always did when she sensed trouble. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the click of a pen. "Are you okay?" I laid out the situation in careful detail. Tyler's phone call with its cruel timing and deliberate coldness. His claim that he'd sold the apartment we'd built our life in. His blatant disregard for the fact that I was the sole legal owner according to documents he'd signed without reading 8 months ago. There was a long pause on the other end, stretching out for what felt like minutes. Then Chloe laughed, sharp, incredulous, and deeply satisfying. "He tried to sell property he doesn't own?" Her voice rose in disbelief. "Please tell me you have the deed. Please tell me this is documented. Filed and notarized. His signature is on the transfer paperwork from the refinance. I have copies in 3 different locations." "Amelia." Chloe's voice was warm with admiration and something that sounded like vindication. "This is open and shut fraud. If he's already taken money from a buyer, if he's entered into a contract he has no legal authority to execute, he's in serious legal trouble. Criminal trouble. What do we need to do?" I asked, taking another sip of wine and settling into the plush hotel armchair. "First, I'll contact the buyer immediately. Do you know who they are?" "No idea. Tyler didn't provide details. I'll track them down through public records. Once I find them, I'll inform them that the sale is invalid because Tyler isn't the legal owner. You're the sole owner and he had no authority to sell. Then we'll draft a cease and desist letter for Tyler, outlining the consequences of his actions in very clear language. If he pushes back, if he tries to fight this, we take him to court. And trust me, Amelia, he'll lose. Badly." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me like a warm blanket. Tyler had spent years treating me like I was too naive to notice his manipulations, too trusting to question his decisions, too passive to stand up for myself. But I'd been paying attention all along. I'd been careful, thorough, and patient. And now, that patience was about to pay off in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. I spent the rest of my business trip focused and clear-headed, channeling my energy into work and strategy. Every spare moment, during taxi rides, over room service dinners, in the quiet hours before sleep, I thought through the next steps. What I'd say when I saw Tyler face to face, how I'd handle the inevitable confrontation when his confidence finally cracked, how I'd reclaim not just my home but my entire sense of self-worth. By the time I boarded the plane home 3 days later, watching the city shrink beneath me through the airplane window, I wasn't just ready for a fight. I was ready to win. The buyer turned out to be a young couple in their late 20s, Emma and David Chen, first-time homeowners who'd been charmed by Tyler's smooth talk and promises of a quick, easy sale that would benefit everyone involved. They'd handed over a $40,000 deposit in cash, skipping the usual title search because Tyler had assured them it was unnecessary red tape that would only slow things down. "Trust me," he'd apparently told them, flashing that confident smile I knew so well. "I've done this before. Everything's in order." When Chloe reached out to them with the truth, that Tyler wasn't the legal owner, that he'd committed fraud, that their dream home purchase was built on lies, they were devastated and furious in equal measure. "They're threatening to press charges," Chloe told me over the phone as my plane touched down, wheels hitting the runway with a gentle bump. And honestly, they have every right to. Tyler committed textbook fraud. He entered into a contract he had no authority to execute, took their money under false pretenses, and probably spent at least some of it already. "Let them," I said, hauling my suitcase off the luggage carousel, scanning the crowd for the exit. Tyler made his choices. Now he can deal with the consequences like an adult. "There's one more thing," Chloe added, her tone shifting to something more cautious. "I sent Tyler a formal letter this morning, outlining the legal situation in very clear terms. He hasn't responded yet, but based on the read receipt, I know he's seen it. I'm guessing he's going to lose his mind when he realizes what he's actually done." Good, I thought, stepping out into the cool evening air. Let him spiral. Let him feel a fraction of the panic he'd tried to inflict on me. When I arrived home, the apartment was eerily quiet. The familiar creak of the front door. The scent of the lavender diffuser I'd left running. Everything exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow different. Tyler's things were still scattered everywhere. His gym bag shoved in the corner near the coat closet, his jacket draped carelessly over the dining chairs, his running shoes kicked off by the door where he always left them despite my request to use the shoe rack. It looked lived in, comfortable, like he'd expected to return at any moment and resume his life as if nothing had changed. But the energy felt different. The space no longer felt like ours. That nebulous, shared territory of compromise and mutual ownership. It felt like mine. Completely, undeniably mine. I set my suitcase down in the entryway and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the messages Tyler had sent while I was traveling. They painted a clear picture of his emotional devolution over the past 3 days. "We need to talk." Sent Tuesday, 11:47 a.m. "This is ridiculous. Call me. Tuesday, 3:22 p.m. "Amelia, I'm serious." "Pick up the phone. Tuesday, 8:15 p.m. "What the hell is this letter from your lawyer? This is insane." Wednesday, 9:03 a.m. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." Wednesday, 2:47 p.m. "Please, let's just talk about this like adults." Thursday, 11:34 a.m. I ignored them all, feeling a small surge of satisfaction at each increasingly desperate message. Instead, I called a locksmith. His name was Marcus, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who arrived within 90 minutes. Within 2 hours, every lock in the apartment had been changed. Deadbolts, doorknobs, the mail slot lock, even the storage unit key downstairs. I kept one set for myself, gave the spare to Lauren for safekeeping, and watched Marcus pack up his tools. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked, sensing the tension in my shoulders. "It will be," I replied, handing him a generous tip. As his van pulled away from the curb, my phone rang. "Tyler." I let it go to voicemail, watching the screen until it went dark. Amelia, what the hell is this? Some lawyer is sending me letters about fraud? About criminal charges? This is insane. You can't do this to me. This is my home too. Call me back, now. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. The next call came an hour later. This time his voice was angrier, tinged with genuine fear. You think you can just kick me out of my own home? That apartment is half mine, Amelia. I have rights. You're going to regret this. I'll fight you on this, I swear to God. Delete. And then, later that night, as I was making myself dinner in the kitchen that was finally blessedly quiet, the tone shifted entirely. Please, let's just talk about this like adults. I made a mistake, okay? I know I did, but we can fix this. We can work this out. Just call me back, please. But I was done talking. Done explaining. Done giving Tyler chances he didn't deserve and wouldn't appreciate anyway. Lauren came over that evening with takeout from our favorite Thai place and a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. We sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes I'd started packing with Tyler's belongings. Every piece of his life that had cluttered my space for too long. How are you holding up? She asked, pouring 2 generous glasses of Pinot Noir. Honestly? I took a sip, letting the wine warm my chest and ease the tension I'd been carrying for days. I feel free, lighter, like I can finally breathe without someone else's expectations pressing down on me. She raised her glass, her eyes bright with fierce loyalty. To freedom, and to Tyler finally getting exactly what he deserves. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe. Over the next few days, I methodically packed up Tyler's things. Every shirt still hanging in the closet, every book on the shelf that belonged to him, every random piece of junk he'd accumulated over the years, the spare phone chargers, the old concert tickets he'd saved for reasons he could never explain, the cologne bottles lined up on the bathroom counter. I didn't throw anything away. I wasn't cruel, and I didn't want to give him ammunition to claim I'd destroyed his property. But I wasn't about to let him dictate the terms of his exit either. Everything went into boxes, neatly labeled and stacked by the door. Chloe kept me updated on the legal proceedings with regular phone calls that became increasingly satisfying. The Chens have officially rescinded the sale, she told me during one update. They're demanding a full refund of the deposit plus compensation for their time and emotional distress. They had to take time off work for the supposed closing. They'd already given notice to their landlord, and they'd started packing. And Tyler? I asked. He's scrambling. Apparently, he'd already spent a significant portion of the deposit on a down payment for a new condo with Nicole. He's trying to borrow money from friends, but word's getting around about what he did. People aren't exactly lining up to help someone who committed fraud. What happens if he can't pay them back? Then they press charges. And if that happens, Tyler's looking at serious legal consequences, substantial fines, possible jail time depending on the prosecutor's mood, and a fraud conviction on his permanent record that will follow him for the rest of his life. The thought should have made me feel guilty, should have triggered some lingering affection or concern for the man I'd spent 6 years with. Instead, it just felt like justice finally being served. Tyler showed up at the apartment 3 days after I changed the locks. I was organizing the kitchen, finally reclaiming drawer space that had been dominated by his protein powder collection and energy drink stash, when I heard the familiar sound of a key scraping uselessly against the lock. The scraping continued, increasingly frustrated, before finally stopping. Then came the knocking, at first tentative, almost apologetic, then harder and more insistent. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Tyler stood in the hallway, unshaven and disheveled, his hair sticking up at odd angles like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and his usually crisp button-down shirt was wrinkled and untucked. I opened the door just wide enough to see him, keeping the chain lock firmly in place. "You can't be here, Tyler." His face twisted with frustration and disbelief. "Are you kidding me right now? You changed the locks? You actually changed the locks?" "Yes." "This is my home, Amelia." His voice rose, echoing in the hallway. I could hear Mrs. Peterson's door crack open 2 apartments down, our nosy neighbor no doubt listening to every word. "No," I said calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It's not. The deed is in my name. This apartment belongs to me and you're trespassing." He stared at me like I'd just announced I was flying to Mars. "What are you talking about? We bought this place together." We signed the mortgage together. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of the deed I'd saved specifically for this moment. My name printed clearly at the top in bold letters, his signature on the transfer paperwork below, acknowledging the change in ownership. After we refinanced last year, the bank required a single owner for the lower interest rate. You signed the paperwork transferring full ownership to me. Remember Patricia, the loan officer? Remember how she explained everything in detail while you were too busy checking your phone to listen? The color drained from his face as he stared at the screen. He snatched the phone from my hand, bringing it closer to his face like proximity would somehow change the words. You tricked me. You deliberately tricked me into signing away my home. No, Tyler, you didn't read what you signed. That's not trickery. That's you being careless and arrogant. That's you assuming I'd always clean up your messes. That's you treating me like I was too stupid to protect myself. He shoved the phone back at me, his hands shaking visibly now. This doesn't change anything. I have rights. We're married. You can't just kick me out. Actually, I can. This is my property. Legally, you have no claim to it. And by the way, the couple you conned out of $40,000, Emma and David Chen, they're coming after you. Chloe estimates you have about a week to return their deposit plus additional compensation before they press criminal fraud charges. His expression shifted from anger to genuine panic, the bravado draining away like water through a sieve. I don't have that kind of money. I already spent most of it on... He stopped himself, but too late. On the condo with Nicole? I finished for him. Yes, I know. Chloe found the purchase agreement. You put down $35,000 on a place you can't possibly afford now. Amelia, please. His voice cracked. I screwed up. I know that, but you don't have to destroy me over this. We can work something out. I'm not destroying you, I said quietly, feeling a strange sense of detachment. You did that to yourself. Every choice you made led to this moment. I'm just protecting what's mine. I held out a folder through the gap in the door, the papers inside already prepared and reviewed by Chloe. Divorce papers. My lawyer drafted them this morning. Sign them within the week, and maybe, I'll ask the Chens to consider a payment plan instead of pressing charges immediately. He took the folder with trembling hands, his fingers fumbling with the edges. You really want to throw away 6 years? Just like that? You already did that, I said, my voice steady and clear. The moment you called me in that conference room and laughed about leaving me homeless. The moment you chose Nicole over our marriage. The moment you tried to steal my home. Now sign the papers and get out of my life. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly, searching for arguments that wouldn't come. Finally, he just nodded, defeated, and turned to walk away. I closed the door and locked it, the deadbolt sliding home with a satisfying click, listening as his footsteps retreated down the hallway, each one sounding heavier than the last. For a long moment, I stood there in the silence, my heart pounding but my hands perfectly steady. I'd won. Tyler signed the divorce papers within a week. No lawyer, no negotiation, no dramatic courtroom showdown. He couldn't afford any of it, and he knew fighting would only make things worse. Chloe handled the proceedings with surgical precision, ensuring that every detail was airtight, every clause ironclad. The apartment remained entirely mine. No negotiation, no splitting of assets. Tyler got nothing. No furniture, no shared savings, nothing. He'd gambled everything on a relationship with Nicole and a fraudulent sale that was never his to make. And he'd lost spectacularly. Nicole, as it turned out, had her own breaking point when she found out Tyler was facing potential criminal fraud charges and had blown through their shared savings, money she'd contributed, to their supposed fresh start, trying to cover the Chen's deposit. She vanished. According to mutual friends who couldn't resist gossiping, she'd blocked his number, scrubbed him from all her social media accounts, and moved back to her parents' house 3 states away. The expensive condo they'd been so excited about foreclosed before they'd even moved in, leaving Tyler with a ruined credit score and nothing to show for it. Tyler tried calling me once after Nicole left, his voice small and defeated, stripped of all its former confidence. Do you know where Nicole went? She won't answer my calls. I hung up without saying a word. The divorce was finalized exactly 6 weeks after I filed the paperwork. Quick, clean, and absolutely final. Tyler didn't show up to the brief court hearing. According to Chloe, he'd scraped together enough money, borrowed from his parents and a couple of friends who hadn't yet heard the full story, to pay back the Chen's deposit, but it had wiped out his savings entirely and left him deeply in debt. He'd moved into a cramped studio apartment across town, picked up extra shifts driving for a rideshare service to cover his rent, and stopped answering calls from mutual friends who'd started asking uncomfortable questions. Lauren came over the night the divorce papers were officially stamped and filed, carrying champagne and Thai food from our favorite place. We sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like earthbound stars, the cool evening air brushing against our skin and carrying the scent of the jasmine plant I'd recently bought. "You did it," she said, raising her glass with a proud smile. "You actually did it. You took him down and walked away clean." I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a small smile play at my lips. It wasn't about taking him down. It was about taking back what was mine, my home, my peace, my self-respect. "Still," Lauren said, grinning mischievously, "watching Tyler crash and burn after what he tried to do to you? That's pretty damn satisfying." I couldn't argue with that. Over the next few weeks, I began to reclaim the apartment in earnest, turning it from a space haunted by Tyler's presence into a true reflection of who I was. I rearranged all the furniture, moving the couch to catch better light, and creating a reading nook in the corner where Tyler's gaming chair had once dominated. I moved my favorite artwork out of the storage unit, pieces I'd hidden away because Tyler had complained they were too feminine or didn't match his aesthetic. I filled the space with plants, books, soft throws, and things that made me genuinely happy. It wasn't just redecorating. It was a deliberate act of erasing every trace of Tyler's presence, of turning the apartment into a sanctuary that belonged completely and entirely to me. The silence was different now. Not the heavy, uncomfortable silence of a failing relationship where words go unspoken because they'll only cause fights. Not the lonely silence of waiting for someone who's never really present even when they're home. This was peaceful silence. Freeing silence. The kind of quiet that felt like coming home to yourself. I started saying yes to things I'd put off for years. Dinner parties with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Weekend hiking trips that Tyler had always vetoed because he preferred staying in and watching sports. A pottery class I'd been curious about since college, but never pursued because Tyler said it was a waste of money. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, earning the promotion I'd been quietly chasing for months. My boss noticed the change in me during a one-on-one meeting. "You seem different lately," she said, studying me over her reading glasses. "More confident. More decisive." "I feel different," I admitted. Lighter. And slowly, steadily, I realized something profound. I didn't just survive Tyler's betrayal. I thrived because of it. 6 months after the divorce, my life looked completely different. Not because I'd burned everything down and started over in some dramatic reinvention, but because I'd finally given myself permission to build something that was entirely, authentically mine. The apartment had transformed into a genuine sanctuary. I'd repainted the bedroom a soft sage green that reminded me of early spring mornings. I hung sheer white curtains that let the morning light filter through in golden waves, making the whole room glow. The kitchen, once cluttered with Tyler's protein powder collection and energy drink stockpile, now featured a proper herb garden on the windowsill. Basil, rosemary, thyme that I actually used when cooking. The living room, formerly dominated by Tyler's oversized gaming setup and sports memorabilia that I'd always found garish, now featured a velvet reading chair in deep blue, positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. The bookshelf I'd built myself stood against the far wall, filled with novels I'd been meaning to read and plants that actually thrived under my care. It wasn't just a space anymore. It was a home, my home in every sense that mattered. Work had become a source of genuine pride, rather than just a distraction from a crumbling marriage. The promotion came with new responsibilities, and I threw myself into projects that challenged me, that made me feel sharp and capable and valued. I led presentations with confidence, spoke up in meetings without second-guessing myself, and stopped apologizing for taking up space. My colleagues noticed the transformation. During a company happy hour, my coworker Sarah pulled me aside. "I don't know what's different about you lately," she said, studying me with curious eyes. "But you're glowing, like genuinely glowing. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Lauren joked that I'd leveled up in life, and maybe she was right. I'd spent so long dimming my own light to make Tyler feel comfortable, to avoid his sulking when I succeeded at something he hadn't, to maintain peace in a relationship that demanded I stay small. Now I remembered what it felt like to shine without apology, Dating wasn't on my radar yet, despite well-meaning friends trying to set me up. Some insisted that the best way to move on was to get back out there, but I wasn't interested in jumping into something new just to prove I was over Tyler. I was enjoying my own company too much, the freedom to make decisions without consulting anyone, to spend weekends however I wanted, to go to bed without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me like a physical burden. One Saturday afternoon, I was at the farmer's market near my apartment, examining heirloom tomatoes and chatting with the farmer about her growing techniques, when I saw him. Tyler. He was walking alone, shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen during our marriage. He'd always carried himself with exaggerated confidence, chest out, chin up, taking up as much space as possible. Now he looked diminished, somehow smaller, wearing a faded jacket I recognized from years ago, back when we couldn't afford the expensive clothes he'd later insisted on buying. Our eyes met across the crowded market. His expression flickered through several emotions: surprise, discomfort, maybe a hint of shame. He opened his mouth as if to speak, to offer some greeting or explanation. I gave him a polite nod, the kind you'd give a stranger whose face looks vaguely familiar, and turned back to the tomato vendor. "I'll take 3 of the heirlooms," I said, pulling out my wallet. When I glanced back a moment later, Tyler was gone, swallowed by the crowd. I didn't feel anger, didn't feel the vindictive satisfaction I might have expected from seeing him looking worn down and defeated. Didn't even feel the quiet triumph that had sustained me through the darkest days of the divorce. I felt nothing, and that was everything, because indifference, I'd learned, was the final stage of truly moving on. Not rage, not bitterness, not even the quiet pleasure of watching someone suffer the consequences of their actions. Just the simple, liberating truth that they no longer mattered to your story. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink as it dipped below the city skyline. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd stood in that conference room hallway, gripping her phone, listening to her husband laugh as he systematically tried to upend her entire life. She'd been strong even then, strong enough to stay calm, to think clearly, to set a plan in motion instead of falling apart. But she'd also been afraid of what came next, afraid of facing the world alone, afraid that maybe Tyler was right, that maybe she wasn't enough on her own. I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all to Tyler. I'd taken back my home, my independence, my sense of self-worth, and I'd done it entirely on my own terms. I'd built a life that felt authentic and joyful and completely mine. The future stretched out before me, wide and open and full of possibilities I hadn't even considered when I was busy trying to save a marriage that had been dying for years. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Not because I needed to prove I'd moved on, but because I genuinely wanted to see where my own path would lead, without anyone else's expectations shaping the journey. Every story has a message, and this one taught me that the quietest revenge is the one they never see coming, and the sweetest victory is realizing you don't need it anymore. True freedom isn't about watching someone else fall. It's about building a life so fulfilling that their opinion becomes irrelevant. What's a lesson you've learned from standing up for yourself? Share it in the comments below, and subscribe if you want more stories about resilience, strength, and taking back control of your life.